What if everything you thought you knew about someone changed in an instant? Let me take you to a quiet cafe where a simple cup of coffee turned into a lesson none of us will forget. The bell above the door jingled, its cheerful sound announcing another customer's arrival. Inside Haven grounds, the warm aroma of coffee beans mingled with the soft hum of acoustic music. The baristas moved in rhythm, filling orders for regulars who basked in the charm of the urban cafe. But all of that changed the moment he walked in. The man was unassuming at first glance, mid-40 seconds, with a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself. A worn leather jacket rested on his shoulders, and his boots made soft but deliberate steps across the hardwood floor. Yet, what truly drew attention was perched on his head, a red hat with 4 bold words embroidered across the front. "Bring America back." Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned, glances exchanged, and the friendly energy of the cafe froze in an instant. Behind the counter, Emily Carter felt her chest tighten. Emily had seen hats like that before, at protests, on news segments, and in moments that felt like personal attacks on her values. She had never imagined seeing one here, in her safe space. Yet now, there it was, like a flare igniting memories of speeches and marches that had defined her young adulthood. The man approached the counter, offering a polite smile as he adjusted his hat. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Just a black coffee, please." Emily hesitated, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. Her colleague, Ben, glanced over, sensing her unease. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words felt heavy, tangled in her convictions. Finally, she forced them out. "Sir," she began, her voice trembling. I'm not sure I can serve you." The cafe fell silent. The man blinked, tilting his head slightly. The warmth in his expression didn't fade, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "Excuse me?" he asked, his tone polite yet probing. Emily squared her shoulders, steadying herself. "It's the hat," she said, her voice firmer this time. "It makes people uncomfortable." A faint sigh escaped the man's lips. His gaze swept the room, taking in the wary stares of patrons and the uneasy fidgeting of the baristas. He turned back to Emily, meeting her eyes directly. "And what exactly makes it uncomfortable?" he asked, his voice calm but unyielding. "What would you say in Emily's position? Would you stand firm, or would you serve the coffee? Stay with me. This story is about to take a turn you won't expect." Emily's chest tightened, but she didn't back down. Her fingers curled around the counter's edge as she forced herself to hold his gaze. "It's not just a hat," she said, her voice steadier now. "It stands for things that hurt people I care about. I don't think it belongs here." The man studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Around them, the tension thickened, pressing on every patron in the cafe. Some customers avoided eye contact, pretending to sip their drinks. Others openly watched, their faces a mix of curiosity and quiet approval for Emily's stand. Ben shifted uncomfortably behind the espresso machine, whispering under his breath, "Emily, maybe we should just—" "No," she interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "I won't pretend this is normal, not here." The man's lips pressed into a thin line, and he exhaled through his nose. He adjusted the brim of his hat, his movements deliberate but not hostile. "I see," he said finally, his voice low but calm. "You're making a decision based on what you think this hat represents, not on who I am." "It's not about you," Emily snapped, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "It's about what that message means. It makes people feel unsafe." A murmur rippled through the room. A young man near the back, sporting a Unity Now t-shirt, nodded in agreement, his voice cutting through the silence. "She's right. Symbols like that don't belong in places like this." The man turned toward the voice, his calm demeanor unwavering. "And who decides where they belong? You," he asked, his words pointed but still measured. The young man bristled but didn't reply. Emily crossed her arms, emboldened by the support. "This cafe is supposed to be a safe space," she said firmly. A place where people feel welcome, and that hat, she gestured sharply toward it, goes against everything this community stands for. For a moment, the man didn't respond. He stood there, letting her words linger in the air, his expression inscrutable. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket. The cafe collectively held its breath. Was he going to leave? Argue back? Instead, he pulled out a sleek black business card and placed it gently on the counter between them. Emily blinked at it, confused. "You're right about one thing," he said, his voice steady but now carrying a quiet authority. "This cafe should be a safe space. That's why I built it." The room froze. Emily's mouth fell open as she glanced down at the card, her stomach sinking. There, embossed in gold letters, was a name she instantly recognized. Daniel Harlow, founder, Summit Cafe Group. Her mind raced, trying to process the revelation. This wasn't just a customer. He wasn't just a man with a red hat. He was her boss. Daniel let the weight of the moment settle before speaking again. "I didn't come here to make a statement," he said, his voice softer now but firm. "I came here to check in on one of my cafes, to see how things were running, and I certainly didn't expect to be turned away because of a hat." The silence in the cafe was deafening. Ben's jaw dropped. The young man in the Unity Now shirt shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Emily's cheeks burned as a wave of humiliation washed over her. Her earlier confidence crumbled, leaving her standing there, exposed and uncertain. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel raised a hand, stopping her. "You didn't know," he repeated, his tone neutral. "But you assumed." The words hit her like a blow. Around them, the air in the cafe seemed to shift, less hostile, but now heavy with reflection. When does standing by your principles cross the line into making unfair assumptions? And how would you react if your boss walked in wearing a symbol you disagreed with? Let's keep going, because things are about to get even more complicated. Emily's hands trembled as she stared down at the business card. The golden lettering gleamed in the soft cafe light, mocking her. Daniel Harlow. The name was everywhere in her employee manual and on the cafe's training materials. It belonged to the founder of Summit Cafe Group, the man who had built the very company she worked for from the ground up. And she had just denied him service. I didn't realize," Emily stuttered, her voice barely audible. Daniel's expression remained calm, but his eyes held a weight that made her words feel hollow. "Didn't realize or didn't bother to find out?" he asked, his tone not unkind but steady as a rock. The cafe was so quiet that even the faint hiss of the espresso machine sounded deafening. Customers exchanged wide-eyed glances, and Ben, who was usually the first to diffuse tension, was frozen in place. The young man in the Unity Now shirt cleared his throat, trying to regain some of his earlier bravado. "Look," he said, gesturing toward the hat on Daniel's head. "It's not just her. That thing, what it represents, it's offensive to a lot of people." "She's not wrong." Daniel turned to him, his posture still composed. "And do you think the best way to deal with things you find offensive is to shut them out completely?" The man shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his friends for support, but no one spoke up. Emily found her voice, though it wavered. "I wasn't trying to." She paused, searching for the right words. I thought I was standing up for something important." Daniel regarded her for a long moment. Then, instead of responding immediately, he stepped back from the counter and addressed the room. "Let me ask you all something," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that commanded attention. "How many of you think it's fair to judge someone entirely based on what they wear?" No one answered, but the room was thick with tension. Daniel gestured to his hat. "To me, this represents my beliefs about hard work, opportunity, and the kind of country I want to live in. But I'm not naive. I know it means something very different to others. I'm not here to debate that. I'm here because this cafe, my cafe, is supposed to stand for respect and inclusion. For everyone." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Slowly, some of the patrons began to shift in their seats, expressions softening. Emily swallowed hard, feeling the sting of regret tightening her throat. "I didn't mean to disrespect you," she said quietly, "but the hat." Daniel held up a hand, stopping her again. "The hat," he repeated. "It's just fabric and thread. What matters is the person wearing it and whether you're willing to see beyond the surface." Ben, sensing the room's mood shifting, finally stepped forward. "Sir," he said, his voice careful, "I think Emily's heart was in the right place, but maybe the way this all came out wasn't." Daniel nodded slowly, his stern expression softening just a fraction. "I understand," he said. "Believing in something strongly isn't the problem, but the moment you let that belief stop you from treating someone with basic respect, that's where it falls apart." Emily's shoulders slumped, and she nodded, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice trembling. "I made an assumption, and it was wrong. I see that now." For the first time, Daniel's face softened into a faint smile. "Apology accepted," he said. "But I want you to think about something. What if I hadn't been your boss? Would that have changed how you handled this? And if so, why?" Emily blinked, his words hitting her like a wave. She hadn't thought about it that way. "What do you think? Should your personal beliefs ever override your professional responsibilities? Let us know in the comments and stay tuned, because this story isn't over yet." The tension in the cafe began to ease, replaced by an air of reflection. Daniel stepped back from the counter, giving Emily and the others space to absorb what had just unfolded. He adjusted his hat, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the charged emotions swirling around him. A voice broke the silence. "So, what happens now?" It came from a woman seated near the window, her laptop closed and a "Love is Love" sticker prominently displayed on its lid. Her tone was curious, not confrontational, but her question lingered in the air, begging for an answer. Daniel turned toward her, his gaze steady. "Now," he said, his voice thoughtful, "we move forward. But first, we have to figure out what that means." He looked back at Emily, whose cheeks were still flushed with embarrassment. "Emily," he said gently, "you made a mistake today, but I'm not here to punish you for it. I'm here to learn from it. And I hope you are too." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes shining with a mix of gratitude and lingering shame. "I am," she said softly. "I promise I am." Daniel's expression softened, and he gave her a small nod. "Good," he said, "because this isn't just about me or you or even this cafe. It's about something bigger, something we're all a part of, whether we like it or not." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Suddenly, the young man in the Unity Now shirt spoke up again, his tone less combative than before. "I guess I've been guilty of judging people too quickly," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the floor. "It's just that hat. It stirs up so much anger and hurt, you know." Daniel nodded, his expression serious. "I do know," he said, "and I don't blame you for feeling that way. Symbols have power, and they mean different things to different people. But if we let them divide us completely, we lose the chance to understand each other." The young man hesitated, then nodded back. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You're right." A sense of unity began to settle over the room, fragile but real. Patrons who had once been silent started to engage, sharing their thoughts and listening to one another. Emily, still standing behind the counter, felt a flicker of hope amid her embarrassment. "Mr. Harlow," she said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," Daniel replied. "Why do you wear the hat?" she asked, her voice careful. "I mean, you must know how people react to it. Why keep it on?" Daniel paused, considering his answer. "Because it's part of who I am," he said simply. "I don't wear it to provoke anyone, and I certainly don't wear it to hurt anyone. I wear it because it reminds me of the principles I believe in: hard work, opportunity, and freedom. And I believe we can talk about those principles without tearing each other apart." Emily nodded slowly, his words sinking in. A moment later, Daniel glanced around the cafe, his gaze sweeping over the patrons who had been part of this unexpected moment of reckoning. "This place," he said, gesturing to the warm, rustic space around them, "was meant to be more than a coffee shop. It was meant to be a gathering place, a space where people from all walks of life could come together and share something as simple as a cup of coffee." He paused, letting his words sink in. "If we can't do that here," he continued, his voice firm but kind, "then what hope do we have out there?" The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was reflective, thoughtful. Emily took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I want to be better," she said, her voice steady. "I want to make this place what you envisioned. A place where everyone feels welcome, no matter what." Daniel smiled, the warmth in his expression genuine. "That's all I ask," he said. "What do you think? Can a single moment of understanding change how we see each other? Would you give someone a second chance if you were in Daniel's shoes? Tell us in the comments. And don't go anywhere, because this story isn't over yet." The cafe began to return to life, though the energy was different now, less divided, more thoughtful. Conversations picked up again, but they were softer, tinged with a sense of reflection. Emily wiped her hands on her apron, trying to steady the storm of emotions churning inside her. Daniel moved to a table near the counter, removing his hat and setting it down carefully. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. Emily noticed, and it softened something in her. "Mr. Harlow," she said, stepping out from behind the counter. Her voice was hesitant but determined. Daniel looked up, a slight smile on his face. "Yes? Thank you," she said. "Not just for understanding, but for not giving up on me. I won't forget this." Daniel nodded, his expression kind but firm. "Emily, it's not about giving up. It's about recognizing that we're all figuring this out as we go. What matters is that you're willing to learn, and that takes courage." Her lips curved into a small, grateful smile. "I'll do better," she said, her voice steady. Daniel leaned back slightly, his gaze sweeping the cafe again. "You're not the only one," he said. "We all have work to do." At that moment, the woman with the "Love is Love" sticker on her laptop approached, her steps tentative. "Mr. Harlow?" she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Yes?" he replied, looking up. I wanted to say thank you," she said, "for staying calm, for not turning this into something uglier. I've seen enough fights over things like this to last a lifetime." Daniel smiled gently. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot." She hesitated, then added, "I still don't agree with the message on the hat, but I think I understand you a little better now." "That's all I can ask for," Daniel said, his tone sincere. The young man in the Unity Now shirt also stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "Hey," he said. "I know I came on strong earlier. I was wrong to judge you so quickly. I'm sorry." Daniel extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, the young man shook it. "Thank you," Daniel said. "Apology accepted. And for what it's worth, I admire your passion. It's a good thing when it's pointed in the right direction." The young man nodded, a small smile breaking across his face. As the cafe began to settle back into its usual rhythm, Daniel stood, placing his hat back on his head. He glanced at Emily one last time. "You're going to do fine," he said, his tone warm. "And if you ever have questions about the company, about this moment, about anything, my door is always open." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. "Thank you," she said. Daniel turned toward the door, the cafe bell chiming softly as he stepped outside. The crisp air greeted him, and he paused for a moment, looking up at the sky. He adjusted his hat, took a deep breath, and walked on, leaving the cafe behind. Inside, Emily watched him go, her thoughts a whirlwind of regret, gratitude, and determination. She turned to Ben, who gave her a supportive smile. "Well," Ben said, breaking the silence, "that's a shift change for the books." Emily let out a shaky laugh, her shoulders finally relaxing. "Yeah," she said, "but maybe it's exactly what we needed." As the day carried on, the cafe seemed lighter, as if the weight of earlier tensions had lifted. Patrons lingered longer, talking more openly. Emily found herself smiling, not the forced customer service kind of smile, but a genuine one. She wasn't the same person she had been that morning. None of them were. What do you think? Can one conversation, one moment, change a person's perspective? And what would you have done if you were in Emily's shoes? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Goha Stories for more tales that make you think, feel, and grow. The days that followed brought an unexpected transformation to Haven grounds. What had once been just another neighborhood cafe now felt like something more. A place where conversations carried deeper meaning and connections felt more intentional. Emily, still processing the whirlwind of emotions from her encounter with Daniel Harlow, found herself approaching her work with a renewed sense of purpose. On a quiet afternoon, the cafe was filled with its usual symphony, the soft hiss of the espresso machine, the clinking of ceramic mugs, and the hum of low conversations. Emily stood behind the counter, her hands steady as she prepared drinks. She glanced up as a group of college students entered, their backpacks slung casually over their shoulders. One of them wore a red hat, not exactly like Daniel's, but similar enough to catch her attention. Her stomach tensed, the memory of that day flashing briefly in her mind. But this time, instead of jumping to conclusions, she smiled and welcomed them in. "Can I get you started with anything?" she asked, her tone warm and professional. The young man in the red hat ordered a latte, and as she prepared it, Emily noticed a small sticker on his water bottle, "Unity through understanding." She handed him his drink with a soft smile, realizing that the sticker's message now resonated with her more than ever. Later that afternoon, Emily found herself reflecting on what Daniel had said, "What matters is the person behind the symbol." It wasn't easy to unlearn years of assumptions and biases, but she was trying. Back in his office, Daniel reviewed reports on his cafe chain, but his thoughts kept drifting to Haven grounds. The encounter with Emily had reminded him why he started Summit Cafe Group in the first place, not just to sell coffee, but to create spaces where people could connect. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Maria Clark's name. Maria was a community organizer he'd met years ago, someone who excelled at bridging divides. "Maria," he said when she answered, "I need your help." "What's going on, Daniel?" she asked, her tone curious. He explained the incident at the cafe and his desire to turn it into something constructive. "I want to start hosting community dialogues in our cafes," he said. "Spaces where people can come together, share their perspectives, and actually listen to each other." Maria was quiet for a moment before she replied, "That's ambitious, Daniel, but I like it. Let's do it." The cafe was transformed for the evening, with chairs arranged in a circle and a sign on the door that read, "Bridging Divides, a conversation for everyone." Emily volunteered to help set up, feeling both nervous and excited. As the first attendees arrived, she was surprised to see familiar faces. The young man in the Unity Now shirt was there, along with the woman with the Love is Love sticker. Even Ben showed up, though he admitted he was mostly there for the snacks. Daniel arrived last, his presence as calm and steady as ever. He greeted everyone warmly, his hat absent this time. "This isn't about me," he said with a chuckle when someone pointed it out. "It's about all of us." The discussion began with simple introductions, but it quickly delved into deeper topics, symbols, assumptions, and the personal stories that shaped their beliefs. Emily found herself sharing her own experiences for the first time, explaining why Daniel's hat had stirred such strong emotions in her. "I grew up in a family that was directly impacted by policies I associated with that hat," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "I thought I was protecting people like my parents by refusing to serve him. But I realize now that I was shutting down a conversation before it even started." Daniel nodded, listening intently. When it was his turn, he shared his perspective. "I wear the hat because it represents the values I was raised with," he said. "Hard work, opportunity, and a belief in our potential as a country. But I'm learning to see how it can mean something completely different to others, and that's something I need to understand better." The conversation wasn't always easy. Tensions flared at moments and emotions ran high. But by the end of the night, there was a sense of progress. A feeling that, despite their differences, they were all part of the same community. As the cafe emptied out and Emily wiped down the counters, Daniel approached her. "You did good tonight," he said, his tone warm. Emily smiled, tired but content. "I think we all did," she replied. Daniel nodded, then placed a hand on the counter. "This isn't the end, you know," he said. "There's still a lot of work to do. But I'm proud of the step you took today." Emily looked up at him, her smile growing. "Thank you, Mr. Harlow. That means a lot." "Call me Daniel," he said, tipping an imaginary hat before heading for the door. As the bell chimed softly behind him, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a chance to make a difference. What about you? Do you think conversations like these can really change the world? Or are some divides too deep to bridge? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Elderly Wisdom for more inspiring tales that make you think.